Welcome back, everyone, to Pocketables 2021 Holiday Gift Guide and Roundup. We're going to look at some of the stuff that I'm keeping an eye on this holiday season, either for myself or as gifts, and just run through some of the items we've looked at this year and talk about what is and isn't worth buying. And we're going to break this up. I'm going to try and use the chapters feature on YouTube to break it up into different categories. We're going to start with storage, and we're going to move on to things like imaging and tools and networking, and hopefully that ends up working because I've never actually used that before. Otherwise, let's just go ahead and get into it. And as I said, we're going to start with storage. First up, I just want to talk about removable storage. And that's going to be things like flash drives and SD cards and micro SD cards. You can see here I've got a wide variety of brands and form factors represented. And we've got, let's organize these like this, kind of this cost and form factor scale over here with the flash drives. And we'll do something similar with the SD cards. So, starting with the flash drives, you can see I've got some Micro Center drives here. Those are generally good enough. I mean, we buy them at work. They're cheap. They work well. I've never had one like just blow up or lose all the data on it. Although you don't want to have it be your only source of any particular piece of data. And I've got nothing bad to say about them other than they're generic. But as stocking stuffers, as just general things to have around, as just cheap flash drives if you need a few, they're a good drive to look at. Next up, and these are something we looked at last year, Teams T183 and T193. These are a little bit higher, and they're not necessarily always faster than the Micro Center drives, but they are a little bit more functional. The 193 is the 183 I've probably gotten the most use out of. Has a little bottle opener, a box cutter, a little, 5 or 6 centimeter ruler on the side and a straight edge. That box cutter we've actually used here in the studio to open packages before. The 183 I keep some engineering documents on, and every so often I need to measure something, but quite frankly, just isn't as useful. For me, for other users, students in school, someone doing any sort of math or engineering in college may get more use out of that particular form factor. And then at the very high end here, we've got this new Kingston Data Traveler Max, which I've unboxed. I don't think the video is live yet. This is a USB Type-C flash drive. This particular model is the 1 terabyte version, capable of read speeds and write speeds at capable of read speeds and write speeds at about 1,000 megs a second. Quite frankly, this is now the fastest flash drive we've ever reviewed. Although some of the performance characteristics of this drive, I'm actually going to run it through our SSD test bench because it doesn't quite behave like a normal flash controller would. Obviously, as you go up, you gain capacity, you gain features, you gain price. These Micro Center drives, they give away sometimes. I think pretty routinely you can get the 32 gig drive and a 32 gig SD card free when you walk in the door, basically. These team drives are both under $20 typically. I used them as gifts last year. I mentioned them as gifts last year, and they're still a good item to look at this year. The Kingston drive is new. This is, I want to say like $130, $140 off the top of my head. It might be more. Very expensive, but if you do pro AV work and you have lots of data that you need to move around very quickly and need something that is pocketable, it's not a bad option. Over here, we've got micro SD cards. These two are representative of Kingston's React Plus line. These two are from ProGrade. These are great options depending on the model, and I'll highlight which models are good for what. The Select and the React Go are the two lower end of them. The Select is good for kids' tablets, lower end action cams, things like that. Things that don't necessarily have high read-write rates. It's an entry-level card. It's just your basic, I need an SD card and I don't care about it a whole ton. This Go card, as well as there's a team card that I'll mention in the description, both hold an A2 rating, which makes them excellent options for things like the Nintendo Switch, where you're playing games. Makes them excellent options for Android phones as adaptable storage or anything that you might run apps off of, or some of the smaller tablet PCs or mini PCs, things like the Byte 3 or Byte 4 that have micro SD card slots on them. These are an excellent option for that. These Pro Grade cards and the Kingston Canvas React, sorry, I believe I called these two React cards. These are the Canvas Select and Canvas Glow. Canvas Select and Canvas Go. It's the Canvas React that's actually in our camera right now. Our UHS-2 class cards, they support the higher bus speed. The Pro Grade cards are targeting Pro AV applications. The Kingston card is a little bit lower end, or I should say lower targeting than that, aiming for prosumer applications and entry-level professionals. These are the cards you want in things like 4K cameras, drones that have 4K cameras, higher-end action cams, anything that potentially does slow motion, that needs high data rates. These are all excellent cards, and you can very easily tell what's a UHS-1 versus a UHS-2 based on the presence of this extra set of pins. Now, even though our camera here, which is a 4K camera, doesn't have UHS-2 capabilities in the camera, I still benefit from that when I go to pull the data off. I'm able to read it much faster than I would otherwise. So that's just one of those things where, yes, you're going to pay more for a UHS-2 class card, but you're going to pull the data off faster. Definitely something to think about if you need to pull data off in the field or quickly dump something to get it up on YouTube before midnight on any given day. So that's some of the removable storage. I want to talk about SSDs next, and we've got a couple here. So on the SSD side, I don't have many internal SSDs to show you guys because, quite frankly, they're in either my test bench or in a production system actually being used right now, which is unfortunate. I'd love to grab, a Pilot E or an MX500 and show you those to you guys and say, these are drives I'm keeping an eye on, because I am. But all my MX500s are in laptops. We used one when we upgraded that Toughbook, and I don't have any other spares laying around. And my Pilot E is in my desktop and will be used to edit this video. They're not necessarily the best SSDs. And quite frankly, the best is subjective. A Pilot E is a solid Gen 3 NVMe SSD. Are Gen 4 drives faster? Theoretically. Is that something that actually impacts what I do day to day or what your average user will notice? Not typically. The difference between Gen 3 and Gen 4, it is twofold. They're twice as fast, but we're already doing things like loading games so quickly that it may be 1/100th of a second faster. Really, Gen 4 drives need new technology, things like the texture streaming directly from the SSD to the graphics cards that's supposed to come with the new 3000 series cards and some of the newer DirectX 12 features that just haven't been adopted by enough things to really make an impact today. Doesn't mean that it won't, but typically because of that, when people say I'm on a budget and here's what it is and I need X terabytes of storage, it's going to be a Pilot E and then, bulk storage on something like MX500s for SATA SSDs. So that's internal stuff. I'll also highlight Kingston's KC2500 is another drive, as well as some Gen 4 drives that I've looked at, and they're not terribly priced. If they are not terribly priced and you have a platform that can take advantage of a Gen 4 drive, by all means, go for it. You're not going to hurt yourself. If you don't have a platform that can use it, or quite frankly, if you think the additional money is better spent elsewhere, you're not going to regret getting a Gen 3 SSD. All of that rambling aside, let's talk about the drives we have here. So we've got an Envoy Express, a Mushkin Carbon X, the Fludging Shell Thunder, and the OWC Excelsior 4M2. And these represent completely different drives. This is an external PCIe add-in card that uses 4M2 drives with a PCIe switch to achieve higher performance in addition to higher capacity. This particular model is only configured for 2 terabytes. However, they scale up to, I believe, 16 or 32 directly from OWC, and there's literally nothing stopping you from bringing it to something absurd like 64 terabytes with some of the 8 terabyte SSDs that are available, other than I don't think OWC is willing to invest in producing that as a dedicated model due to how few people would purchase it with its sticker price. We've got a video coming up on, quite frankly, I wish I had some bigger drives to put in it to bring the capacity up, but it's a fantastic device if you have an older platform that doesn't have M2 slots, if you just need more capacity, or, I mean, that's it. If you need more capacity than you can get with the M2 slots you have, if you're willing to invest in 4 of the same size and same brand M2 drives to keep things consistent on the performance end, a solution like this is an excellent one, especially if you do pro video or something like pro game development, database applications, all of those things that scale with more speed. There is an 8M2 version, which in addition to having 4 additional drives, is a 16X card and a Gen 4 card. This one's a Gen 3. Anyway, so this is an internal drive. These 3 are all external, and let's rearrange these so that they're kind of in a sensible order. So the Carbon X is a USB Type-C 10 gig. And you'll notice we have a USB Type-C 20 gig, and the reason for that is compatibility. So this USB Type-C 10 gig can hit 10 gigs a second on any Type A or Type-C port that's capable of it, and you can generally find them all over the place. My Thunderbolt's P50 port is a 10 gig Type-C port. The add-in card that I have in my desktop is a 10 gig Type-C port. Some of the ports on our Z590 test bench are 10 gig Type A and Type-C ports. 3.2 by 2 20 gig just isn't that common, and it's not that I necessarily think that you're not going to find it, but I think it is going to be quickly supplanted by USB 4 and just kind of be this historical footnote. It'll still work with Type 3, 3.2 10 gig ports at 10 gigs a second. It'll still work with Thunderbolt 3 ports at 10 gigs a second, but there's not enough 10 gig or 20 gig devices out there for me to say that's really something worth investing at this particular juncture. Plus, I've got some other stuff we'll talk about in the review. I'm waiting to hear back from Kingston on that drive. Not super sold on it. These 2 are Thunderbolt drives. This is the Fludging Shell Thunder. This is the OWC Envoy Express. They're both available with or without storage, which is dealer's choice there. Quite frankly, I am not necessarily looking for Thunderbolt devices just because of how few Thunderbolt devices I have this year. But if you are deep in Apple's ecosystem, if you have newer systems than I do, if you have higher end systems than I do, you may have more Thunderbolt devices, in which case these are fine. The only caution I will give people purchasing these either for themselves or for others as a gift is that Thunderbolt does not have the guaranteed compatibility that USB Type-C devices do. And what I mean by that is even this device, which is a Type-C native device, if I take, and I've got one somewhere, a simple adapter like this one, and plug it in. Now I can plug it into anything all the way back to a USB 1.1 port. Granted, the odds of having a 1.1 port with an OS with drivers that'll talk to this particular drive are fairly slim, but a 2.0 port's not that far-fetched and uncommon still, and you can find 2.0 devices that'll run Windows 10 just fine. Thunderbolt, on the other hand, needs Thunderbolt support built into the motherboard. I can't get a Thunderbolt add-in card. I can't just throw a simple, like, I don't even think this is a full dollar's worth of adapter at it. I have to have Thunderbolt support at the system level or it's not going to work, which if all of your systems are new enough and support it, that's great. But even stuff like the Z590 motherboard that I have for a test bench doesn't support Thunderbolt out of the box. I believe it needs an add-in card, which the motherboard has to support Thunderbolt signaling for the add-in cards to work. But I'll probably just get us a new Z690 platform instead of investing in that. But that's neither here nor there. The point that I was attempting to make is that be sure that you have Thunderbolt host devices if you're going to buy a Thunderbolt drive. That's it. That's not for or against Thunderbolt. Just these do cost more, but they are faster. But you have to make sure that your devices will work. Not every Type-C port is a Thunderbolt port. Okay, so with that, the last one I want to talk about in storage are these three, which are slightly different devices. We'll start with these two. This is an Acasis NVMe to Type-C 10 gig adapter. And we looked at one from Retop a little while back, and I was happy enough with it, but it was a little fiddly on the hot plug side of things, and it didn't have a button on it. There's going to be a video on this one, but functionally, this is the same exact device with a button, and I think it cost me another $2. So that is to say that the Retop one is fine. I didn't really have any issues with it. But there were a couple of instances where I was swapping drives and forgot to unplug it, and it just didn't detect, and then it just kind of was a hitch in my workflow. So this one has a button. By default, it defaults to off, so you plug the drive in, and then you press the button, and it turns it on. And quite frankly, for the extra $2, it was just more convenient. This is the NECTEC Type-C to SATA adapter, and there'll be a link to a couple of different adapters. That was absurdly cheap and had no reason to work. And you know what? For the $4 that it was, if you have someone that has a lot of SATA drives laying around, or if you do have a lot of SATA drives laying around and you're that person, and you have a Type-C host or don't mind using an adapter, it worked. It worked without issue. And I expected issues. Last up is the Kingston Workflow line of readers. And these are going to be a couple of different places. Number one is if you are the type of person who simply has lots of memory cards. SD, micro SD, and I'll link, there's a company out there, although Kingston doesn't make them, that has introduced CFast and a couple of other readers that interface with this physically. These are great because you can buy this module for, I think it's like $100, and it comes with this, and then you can buy your additional readers for the $20 to $40 that they are, and plug it in, and you build your own card reader that is going to be up to 10 gig, and will let you dump all your memory cards all at once. And there's no rule that says you can't shove 8 dual micro SD card readers in here. So for a prosumer or entry-level professional, you know, do your own business or a smaller business where you're dumping 8 micro SD cards or 8 SD cards that you've been shooting on all day, drones, action cams, handheld cameras, things like our Z-Cam here, and you may have hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes, if not terabytes worth of memory card. You can plug them all in at once and dump everything, you know, go get lunch and come back and then start editing your footage. Because even at 10 gig speeds, it's not going to take, or it's going to take a few minutes minimum to dump terabytes worth of card. The downside to this particular reader, and I'll include some higher end readers if you're in that market segment, is that the modules that Kingston provides only operate at 5 gigs per second, even though this is a 10 gig capable interface device. And that causes all of the modules to operate at 5 gigs per second. There are companies out there, and I think ProGrade's one of them, and I want to say Angel Bird, maybe. There's a couple of other ones that have Thunderbolt 3 readers that are capable of faster interfaces than this, that have support for a wider variety of media, things like RedMag. And if you are in that segment, you either have one of those already or you know what I'm talking about when I say that some of those cards can cost more than this whole reader system would. So I'll link some of those for the higher end, for the normal people. I say normal as I look at all the flash devices here. For the prosumers, for people closer to me, you know, YouTubers, people running smaller businesses, this Kingston reader is really what you want to look at. All right, that's all we have for storage. If you have any questions about any of that, definitely leave it in the comments below. I'm going to clean this up real quick and then we'll move on to the next segment. All right, next up what I want to talk about, and I unfortunately don't have as many of these items in hand as I'd like to because some of them are at work, is imaging. And we're going to start with what I've got, and this is the OkioCam T Plus, I believe they called it. Yeah, T Plus. And this is identical to the regular T model other than having a dry erase board built in. And what these are is these are overhead cameras, document cameras that you can put together and use with anything you'd like. If you're on a Zoom meeting, you can switch to this, put a piece of paper or something underneath it. You can use them in teaching environments. They just show up to the system as a normal USB video device, and therefore they're going to work with anything a standard USB webcam works with. These are a great replacement for overhead projectors for remote learning. These are a great replacement for some of the higher end document cameras, and these run in the $70 to $100 price range depending on the exact model. The $70 model is the S, which is a smaller one. You know what, in hindsight, maybe the S stands for student. Only scales up to, I want to say, 8.5 by 11 size paper. The T, and this is why I said maybe that stands for student, is this particular model. Includes an additional extension segment here that allows you to make the camera taller. And I actually have the standard OkioCam T on my desk at work because sometimes I have 11 by 17s that I need to bring up in a meeting and show on camera. And I can take Zoom or Teams and say I'm going to switch my camera. I actually use OBS, so I have additional control beyond that. But Zoom or Teams will do it just fine. And I can send whatever is under this to my screen. Now, there are a couple of buttons here, and they do have their own software. Things like focus, things to take a picture, start recording. They've got a stop motion recorder. They've got a video recorder and a couple of other things. Those are all Chrome-based, although there is a button interface Windows application. These work with OS X. They work with Linux. They work with... what's the one they work with Chrome OS. They work with Macs, or yeah, I already said OS X. They work with Windows, obviously, and you know, basically anything that knows what to do with the USB camera. I actually hooked one of these up to an Android device the other day, and it worked fine. You'll notice that they do have a 1/4-20 mount, so you can use them as a standard larger format camera, although it is a relatively small sensor, so it's not going to impress anyone as far as that's concerned. The other camera that I want to talk about is one that I got some time to play with. I set it up in a conference room. Is the Ozbot Tiny, and there is an Ozbot 4K as well. That is a USB pan-tilt zoom AI capable camera, and quite frankly that thing might as well have been magic. You held up your hand, you made a gesture, and it would follow you through the room. You made a different hand gesture, it would zoom in, and you made the original gesture, it would stop tracking you. I did record an unboxing, and then after the fact found out that the camera work sucked because I did it on site with a client using my phone. So I don't have any real footage of that to show you beyond what is on Ozbot's site. Needless to say, it's not the cheapest webcam I've ever worked with, but quite frankly, for $170, I still want one. The other device I want to talk about is not really an imaging device, but is something that I suggested with the original Okio cams. That is the Boogie Board Blackboard, or really most of the Boogie Board devices. Those are pressure sensitive tablets, basically. It's a bistable LCD. You put pressure on it and it causes the cells to change color. And really, I have used those all over the place for things that I don't necessarily need a note for 12 hours or 3 weeks on, in place of post-it notes where I just need to remember something running meeting to meeting. I've used them in the studio to put down bullet points I want to talk about for products. I've used it all over the place. And I have one, obviously here's the stylus for it. I have one here at home. I have one at work. Unfortunately, mine are both at work because I wrote some stuff on it and took it to work and then left it there. But I've got a unboxing and some coverage on the Boogie Board Blackboard separately. Those are the quote-unquote imaging devices that I'm really looking at this year. I know they're not necessarily action cameras or anything like that. The other one that I am looking at myself is the Zoom Q8N, which is technically like a music video camera. And quite frankly, if it shot in 4K, I would buy one today. It's a 2560 by 1440 capable, 3 megapixel recorder, but it's got a full audio interface built into it with phantom power and access to Zoom's whole module system. If you know someone who wants to shoot video but needs better audio than they're going to get out of your normal handheld camera or even a smartphone, that's an excellent option to look at, although they are fixed lens. If it was an ILC or if it shot in 4K, I would have bought one by now. Those are the two things that stop me from doing it, but honestly, if it goes on a big enough sale, I'm probably going to get one and have it here on camera. So that is it for imaging. All right, next up is displays, and unfortunately, just like imaging, I've only got one that we can put on camera, because quite frankly, the others are all too large to do that with. The one we've got to throw on camera, if this looks familiar, it's because we unboxed it and reviewed it. This is my Viotech LinQ P16C. If you travel at all, these USB Type-C monitors are fantastic devices. Let's go ahead and see if I can power this one on real quick, although I don't have anything particular to show you guys with it. I don't know if this is a 2.0 or a 3.0 cable. Hey, look at that. All right, so yeah, there's some of the monitors I was looking at for price points that we're going to include. Here's the LinQ's product page. But these USB Type-C monitors are a great item. either for yourself or for someone else who does a lot of traveling. I personally keep this one in my briefcase all the time and use it fairly regularly. I've recommended the other USB Type-C monitors. There's a touch one. We bought one for the guy at work who does app development so he can plug it into his laptop. And he's got a big 1080p touchscreen that he can do all of his gestures and everything on. The other brand I want to highlight for this is called Lapao. These are the ones that a video production company that I work with fairly regularly has purchased. They've got an HDR model. They've got a couple of other different sizes that Videotech does not carry at the moment. Although they're fairly similar, I wouldn't be surprised if they aren't sourcing some of the panels from the same factories, but that's neither here nor there. The other items that I want to talk about, we've looked at a couple of larger Videotech panels, the GFI 27 and the DB32. They're both 32-inch, they're both 1440p panels. One's a 27, one's a 32. I'll put the information for them up on screen. The 27-inch panel, if you play games, is quite frankly a hard value to beat when it's in stock. And that is an issue that a lot of companies are having right now as far as keeping items in stock. The 32-inch monitor is kind of in a weirder place. It is just expensive enough that you might consider getting the 27 anyway, because it doesn't support as high of a refresh rate or come with as nice of a stand, but it is larger. It is still 1440p, and it is a 75 Hz panel, and at work, it's been a fantastic screen. A little bit awkward to use here in the studio. I wish it came with a different stand, but that's neither here nor there. I'll also highlight a couple of other monitors that I have worked with recently, but not necessarily unboxed or anything, that have been excellent options as well. But unfortunately, Videotech's the one that we've actually had Pocketables hands-on time with, even though, you know, I've got Dell Ultra Sharps on my desk, I've got Acer monitors and some Asus panels and a couple of ProArts and things like that scattered around at work. Alright, so the next item I want to talk about, and this is always a popular one, is smart home stuff. And we've got items from a couple of different brands here, and quite frankly, everything you see here I'm actively using somewhere, one way or another. And let me grab one of these as well. So let's start with the bulbs, because that's the easiest one to kind of break into three different sections. This is a bulb from Yeelight, and they are kind of my premium go-to bulb. These are a Wi-Fi bulb, and what I really love about them is, number one is, the other bulbs here, they have okay color reproduction. The Yeelights have fantastic color reproduction when you set them to the different colors. It's not to say that the Genie or Sengled bulbs are inherently bad, but the Yeelights are just better. These are a much heavier bulb. They're an older style as far as the construction's concerned. Still available. What I absolutely love is that they have an open HTTP API. So, and I know that's a bunch of jargon all at once. The short of it is, once they're set up on your Wi-Fi, you can say that I want to control it over the Wi-Fi, and then without any hacking or reflashing, control it from whatever. Be it Home Assistant, be it your desktop. I mean, there's applications you can download and just connect to it via IP address and send it commands and synchronize it to things and all sorts of stuff. So these Yeelights are very open and very interfaceable with all sorts of different stuff, compared to the Genie and Sengled bulbs, which still work great but aren't necessarily as open or flexible. Genie and Sengled are at two different ends of the spectrum. The Sengled bulbs are just an easy go-to everyday bulb. Most of their stuff works fine. They have Zigbee, which is what most of my Sengled bulbs are. That means that I don't have a bunch of Wi-Fi devices on the network, and that's an advantage sometimes in the Zigbee network. I believe it creates a mesh off the top of my head, so you can kind of get a larger area than you might with just Wi-Fi bulbs. Although some of their newer, higher-end bulbs and their RGB bulbs do tend to be Wi-Fi anyway. The Seglin bulbs are just, they work. They're simple. Most of mine are just dimmable and single temperature. They're very basic. These Genie bulbs, you can get anything and everything in any shape and any style you want from them. This particular model is one of their Prisma, let's say it's a 1,000 lumen bulb, which is why it's a little bit larger. This is a, I wanted to say an 800 lumen. Does it say on the side of the bulb? Sorry, 1050 lumen. Versus, yeah, 800, but this is also an RGB bulb. And I have these, and I have some Edison style bulbs, and I have some candle style bulbs from Genie that are all very flexible, or not safer. They're all fantastic bulbs, but they're all Wi-Fi, which can be a disadvantage. The 1,000 lumen bulbs are physically larger. There's a couple of fixtures I have that this just doesn't fit in. And then beyond that, I do like the Yeelight's RGB better, but neither Yeelight nor Singled makes a Edison style bulb, as far as I'm aware. And neither one of them, as far as I'm aware, also has smart plugs. And this is a Genie Dot. And you can see I've got a couple of different smart plug devices from them. Now, some of these I like better than others. What I think is missing on these two, this is a power strip and this is just a block, is there's no individual power buttons for the outlets on either of these, so it's all on or all off unless you're doing app-based control. What I really appreciate is there are places this Dot fits where this TP-Link plug doesn't, but then there's places this TP-Link plug fits, this Dot doesn't. In fact, I think we've got a good example here of I have certain plugs that would not fit next to this TP-Link adapter like that, whereas this Dot provides just a little more clearance here. I've actually got one of these in an outdoor enclosure because it fits better than the TP-Link device. Now I also want to mention TP-Link because I've been using these Wi-Fi plugs all over the place commercially. They're a more recognized brand than Genie. I've got a bunch of these at work. They were on the market sooner, and I use them for plenty of automation there where I need it to turn a display on at a certain time, or I need to have the ability to remotely power something on and off that's 20 feet in the ceiling. The other smart home device I do want to mention is thermostats. Personally, I've had an excellent experience with the Lux Kono model thermostat. It's not quite as advanced as the Nest, but it is the category of what I will call smart enough. I don't want it to use a motion detection and decide when I am and am not in the space. Quite frankly, my house doesn't have enough dampers on the ducts to do anything intelligently with that. I don't have VAV boxes in every room to control what room does and doesn't get heat, and a motion sensor in each one. So there, would be days the thermostat would have no idea that I'm home because I'm not going to walk in front of it. The Lux Kono, I can set it, I can schedule it, I can control it remotely through the Google Home. And like I said, that is smart enough. And I think I got it for 79 bucks. Maybe it was 50. I got mine on a deep discount. I think it's under 100 normally anyway. But it was cheaper than the Nest. It connects just fine to my thermostat. And I haven't really had anything bad to say about it. Other than I think they updated their app maybe 3 or 6 months after I got it. And I had to re-authenticate my phone to the service because they updated the whole user interface and everything. So That's neither here nor there, and I wish I had a thermostat to show you, but I'd have to go rip it off the wall. As far as smart devices go, this is the kind of stuff that I use for the most part. I have a ton of these Genie lights. I have a handful of these Ye-Lights places where it is beneficial for me to have better color than I can get out of a Ye-Light or a Sengled, and that's not, like I said, that's nothing against them particularly. You know, I've got these in my kitchen and my living room, but there's a couple of areas where I just want a redder red, so to speak. The Ye-Lights are just a better bulb. And personally, if these were cheaper, I would have more of them because I love playing with the open API. But that's neither here nor there. Well, I should say that if you're the type of person who wants to set them up on Home Assistant, these are really easy to set up. Because like I said, you just connect it to the app and then you say, open up the port, and then you can talk to it over your network. All right, next up, we are going to talk about tools. All right, so next up I want to talk about some tools, and I also want to retract a previous suggestion. In 2020, I recommended what I thought were some really cool tools, and that would be these general tool smart tools. And what I have run into, actually in the past month or so, is that I can't sign into their app, and some of the tools just don't want to interface with the S62 I've got in for review. So unfortunately what I have to say is that I can't really recommend these tool smart tools beyond their basic functions. And what I mean by that is this is still a perfectly good scope for looking inside things. The angle gauge still works. The multimeter still measures things. But I can't recommend them for any of their smart functions where I'd be able to record the video or save things. And it looks like that may have just been kind of abandoned in place. None of it looks like it's been updated in multiple years, which is kind of a bummer. So if anyone knows of some way to talk to these tools without the actual ToolSmart app, let me know in the comments. But we are going to talk about some quote-unquote dumb tools, I suppose. Let's start with the simpler ones. So a lot of these came from Harbor Freight, and I will post links to similar tools from various companies in the description alongside these. And let's start with, this one's probably my favorite. These are the Doyle Electricians Multi-Purpose Pliers, or I should say Multi-Purpose Electricians Tool, I believe they call it. This is the best standard wire stripper I've ever used. A lot of the other ones are just stamped metal with no ground edge. They're very thin. It's very easy to just like bend the wire stripper and not actually strip any of the coating off. These are sharp. They work well. I actually just use these to repair my 3D printer. You can actually see there's a little bit of insulation left on the wire strippers from that job. It'll cut 832 and 632 bolts. It's got a crimper built in, and it actually has some needle nose pliers for grabbing things. Now these are similar to, there's a set by Milwaukee, and I think there might be one by Klein, that have a couple of different features. I think the Milwaukee ones have a ream feature as well as are spring-loaded, whereas these have a crimp. Not 100% sure on the Klein version, but I'll put a link to that one if I can find it as well. These live in my briefcase, not my tool bag, because I use them that often for cutting wires and stripping things. I also have a different stripper that I'll recommend for anyone dealing with Ethernet that I use as a jacket ripper. That's also, I believe that one's a Quinn. That is a adjustable jaw wire stripper, and it really just, you set the tension right and you just grab it and it'll rip the jackets right off the ends of the Ethernet cable. These also live in my briefcase. These are technically called tweezer pliers, is what Harbor Freight calls them. These are not quite necessarily as special, but for the number of tweezers I have bent trying to pull small things out of places, the additional girth to the blades here is definitely appreciated, while being much smaller than standard needle nose pliers. These three happen to be Quinn branded tools, once again from Harbor Freight. This is Quinn linesman pliers. I did not know I needed a better set of linesman pliers than I had till I got my hands on these. These are the 8-inch linesman pliers, much better than the standard Pittsburgh ones, much better than your typical just in a $10 tool set, you know, where you get a diagonal cutter and a needle nose plier and a linesman plier style. These are good steel. They hold a nice edge. We've got a good jaw here. We've got a good surface here for flattening things out as well that's, well, serrated. These things work fantastically. There is another step up that I believe they have Doyle branded linesman pliers. Personally, I don't think the Doyle one is worth the additional money beyond the Quinn model, unless you use them every single day. These will fit what 9 out of 10 users actually need. Same thing with the diagonal cutters. Nothing necessarily earth-shattering here. I already knew some of the other diagonal cutters I had were crap. These are just very good ones. Little hint, if you're out tool shopping, if you take something like a diagonal cutter or a linesman plier or even needle nose and you close the jaw and you hold it up, and if you can see any light through those two surfaces, you've got a bad tool there. Grab another one. Maybe you've got a dud. If the other one from the same model looks the same, go pick a different model. They're not ground well. These, even after years of use, there's no visible light through the cutting surfaces here. These Quinn, Pittsburgh, Doyle are all lifetime warranted at Harbor Freight. These fit a couple of places normal needle nose pliers didn't, and I really wasn't going to drag these out until I saw them in the bag while I was looking at the different tools. They're just 45 degree, or I should say they call them pistol grip style needle nose pliers, and every so often there's something that I can't get to with regular straight pliers that I can with these, and I'm happy to have them. So definitely an item worth considering for holiday shopping. If you've got someone who you think has every tool in the world, well, I had never seen these till this year. Next up, I want to talk about these two. These are from Tack Life, and if they look familiar, it's because these are both basically knockoffs of some Klein tools. I'll link the Tack Lifes and I'll link the Kleins. This is your standard 4-in-1 style mini screwdriver. This is the one that lives in my briefcase. It also comes with a small bit sleeve so you can change what's on it. Typically I just have the number 1 and number 0 Phillips on it, although as you can see I've used the 00. Never actually used the Torx. But so this is just your standard 4-in-1 style driver, but you can customize it a bit. Comes with all the way down to 000 and a 5/64 slotted, and then it also comes with a T5, and I want to say that's a T4 Torx. Stamped in it. Sorry, T6, T5 and T6 Torx. And then scales up to Phillips 1. This is a nut driver, and I've had sets of nut drivers before, and what I will say is that this is better and worse than the sets of dedicated nut drivers. It is better in that I have one tool I can carry that gives me, what do we got? 6 different sizes, 7 sizes, because the handle is also a size. Theoretically, if I had 2 of these, could have 1 metric and 1 SAE. This particular one is just SAE sizes. However, that's at the disadvantage of this thing's heavy. Heavier than a traditional nut driver would be. So you have additional weight, and it is a bit bigger. There's a couple of places this won't fit that you can get, a stubby handled, we'll say 1/4-inch nut driver for. But it's well built, it's good plastic, it's got these different stepped size hexes so you can grab it with a couple of different wrenches if you need more torque when you're trying to take off a bolt. Overall, really handy to have. Finally, this thing we've heard in the studio plenty of times. I don't think Creation Space is around, but it was one of those tools that, there's 20 different brands making the same tool, all out of the same factory with different names. This is a just lithium-ion powered rechargeable mini electric screwdriver. These bits aren't missing. They're actually next to my 3D printer because I was working on the hot end earlier. But overall, really good kit. Came with plenty of different driver bit sizes. A bit dusty in there from some of the environments it's been. Frankly, I have no real complaints as long as you keep its limits in mind. And what I mean by that is I was working on electrical outlets maybe 2 weeks after I got one of these, and it stopped. And instead of grabbing a proper size screwdriver, because this had the number 1 Phillips on it, which fit, I just grabbed it and cranked it with my hand and busted the gearbox internally. So keep in mind that these things do have a limit. If it stalls out on the torque limit, you probably don't want to put too much more force on it. All right, last up, multimeters. I want to talk about 2 different ones. These are both from Harbor Freight. This one is the Ames DM1000. This is my Centec, what do they call it, 7-in-1 these days, digital multimeter. These are both good meters, and I've not really had any problems with either one in my testing. This one I purchased, this one was sent in by Harbor Freight. But what I will say is I think I like the older meter better. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The new meter uses a single 9-volt battery. The old meter uses AAAs. I don't like 9-volt batteries. I just don't. So multiple AAA batteries is a win for me. The older style meter, the terminals would light up and it would beep at you if you plugged something in wrong, which I liked. It also environmentally had more functions, and I'm not going to say that that's inherently better or worse, because presumably each of these is less accurate than, say, a dedicated thermometer, a dedicated light monitor, light meter, a dedicated sound meter. But having each of those on here was typically good enough for most of the things that I wanted to do. The DM1000 still has the thermometer, but dropped the light meter and the humidity. Or I think it still may measure humidity, but it dropped the internal. Oh, it still got the internal. It dropped humidity, it dropped sound, it dropped light. So it's missing some of the environmental functions. Now it gains some better multimeter functions with things like non-contact voltage. But overall, that is I guess I'll say it's pick your use case type thing. Day to day, this does enough multimeter stuff and has additional environmental functions that it is beneficial for me. If I was working on nothing but electronics, this is, from what I can tell, a slightly more accurate meter and does still have a temperature probe when I want to figure out if I'm melting something. but I can't measure sound and I can't measure light level, which I do both fairly often. So this one goes with me to work. This one lives in the studio. And that's okay. There's some people that have a dozen multimeters. I actually have another one that I want to mention for this that lives in my briefcase. And this is called Pocket Meter. Oh, and that's the extra fuse. And this is a little app-controlled, Bluetooth connectable multimeter. And this one just has a couple of little probes that click out, and you can measure various things with it. And I use this one inside laptops when I'm working on stuff with my briefcase if I want to figure out, is that coin cell battery dead, or am I getting 20 volts out of the laptop's AC adapter? However, it has limits that make it less generally useful. It's limited to 50 volts off the top of my head. And it does need a phone in order to be functional. It's not a full meter on its own. It has no display, but it does have this little carrying case and these additional clamp-on test leads that are handy. I actually wish I had a set of these for my larger meters sometimes. And the pocket meter has its place, and that's actually in my briefcase. This was in my tool bag, which I don't always take with me every day. I take it with me most days. Like I said, this one was here in the studio. So this is one of those situations where this is better than having no meter. This is a great everyday meter, but not necessarily the best. And this particular model is a better meter. It's newer, it's more advanced, it's got better electronics in it. This thing probably could use calibration. I've had it for 10 plus years at this point. But what I wanted to get to was all of these fit different use cases. Someone who works on Raspberry Pis always has a phone with them or an Android tablet or something like that would probably do just fine with one of these pocket meters if they never deal with lines voltage. If you ever touch mains voltage, the pocket meter is out. We've got these two meters. This one is identical to a Mastech model that I will also link. This one is similar to and produced for Harbor Freight by Mastech. And that's kind of a bit of an open secret there. In fact, it even came with an MS3204 thermocouple adapter, which it wasn't supposed to. I believe they fixed that at this point. And that's not to say that Harbor Freight has no input on these, but it's very easy to go to a big multimedia manufacturer like Mastech and say, I want 100,000 of those with the Suntech label on them, which is what happened here. Or, you know what, I want something custom. Let's start with that meter on the shelf and then make changes. Which is a perfectly valid way of making things. They're not the only ones who do stuff like that. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We're just talking about holiday stuff at this point. And what I'm getting at is multimeters. Definitely something that a certain type of user would appreciate as a Christmas gift. Personally, if I had to pick one of these and only have it, it would be this one. Obviously I have all three. I think Pocket Meter's coming out with a larger probe style meter that'll finally have a display as well as the Bluetooth interface, and that may change my mind. But I've used this meter's light meter in some of our reviews. Alright, so that's a quick rundown with tools. There'll be links to these as well as a few others. I've got some Hago tools that were suggested to me as well that I don't personally use, but I know the people who do. And those are going to be good analogs for some of these different tools here. And like I mentioned, these have Klein equivalents that cost a little more but come with better warranties and maybe a better choice for some users. Next up, what I want to run through, and this will be a quicker one, even though I've got a handful of items here. I've only got 2 of them in the studio. Is I want to talk about networking stuff. If you have people who are interested in networking, or you yourself are interested in network hardware, I don't think any of it's going to be particularly discounted for Black Friday or Cyber Monday, just due to who makes it. But I'm going to once again endorse this MikroTik stuff. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Number one, they cover a huge market swath of different features and devices. These two here are unfortunately all I've got in the studio. This is a HAP AC, which is one of the devices I'm going to be recommending. And this is a RB260GS, which is not necessarily a device I can't recommend, but not necessarily one I'm going to recommend, just based on what it is. This is just a switch. It's a gigabit switch that I adore because it has PoE in, which means I don't need to run dedicated power to it. And it's a fantastic device if you need to deal with fiber to Ethernet conversion, or just need to have a workgroup switch somewhere that you don't necessarily want to deal with a DC jack. You run an Ethernet cable from your main switch, which in my case is a CRS328, and it'll take PoE in and run the switch. This is a HAP AC, which is kind of the 3rd out of 4 devices I am going to link to and recommend. And this is a router, but it's also an access point depending on how you configure it. And that's where MikroTik stuff kind of gets weird. All of their big stuff, all of their configurable stuff, or I shouldn't say configurable, all of their manageable stuff, anything that's beyond a basic switch. So this runs Switch OS, which is fairly basic. You can do some VLANs and stuff in it, but nothing huge. Anything that runs anything beyond that, like this, runs Router OS. And when I say it all runs Router OS, I mean this runs the same Router OS that the RB3011 that I have as my firewall right now runs, that my CRS328 runs, that the 1016 that we've looked at before, and the 2004 that we've looked at, and the 1032 we've looked at before, all run. So whether I'm dealing with the very bottom end of the CCR series, like a 1009, at the very top end, a 1072, or anything in between, or a bunch of the switches, or the access points, they all run Router OS. So you can get a device like a map or a map Lite, which are mini access points that are super tiny. I'll put the product picture one on the screen. Up through this HAP, or say a 4011, they'll all run Router OS. You can play with it all you want. And quite frankly, you'll run out of hardware processing power in these before you run out of bells and whistles that you can play with. Which is the downside, is that this HAP AC has more features that are available to it in software than it physically has hardware to run. But as long as you're aware of that, and you're not trying to use this to run a multi-story building with a dozen companies in it, and you properly pick the right, or properly select your hardware, that's, not an issue. That's the gotcha with MikroTik. Everybody's got their own gotcha. MikroTik is, you can buy a map Lite for like $30, and it'll run the same software that the CCR 1072 will. But the map Lite has like 64 megs of RAM, not 32 gigs. It doesn't have a 72 core tile CPU in it. It's got one little single, I think it's like a little 400 or 800 megahertz MIPS chip in it. So you've got that. They do have different license levels for Router OS, but quite frankly, those are usually so far beyond the hardware's capabilities itself that it doesn't matter. So if you're interested in networking stuff, you just want to play with it, these things are a really inexpensive way to get access to a lot of the higher level networking features that you could pay thousands of dollars sometimes for. A map light will run an SSL or a PPTP or a SSH VPN just as well as a CCR 1036. Now, it's going to limit it. You're going to run out of CPU time, and it may only pass 10 megs a second, but it'll let you set it up and play with it and break it and poke at it before you go buy something bigger and try it there. And they're great for labs, they're great for home users, they're great for small and medium businesses. So this MikroTik stuff, I'll put a couple of different devices there. The big one that I would recommend to a lot of people is going to be the HAP AC as just an entry-level device, and then the RB4011 it's about $200. It is a 10-port gigabit and 10 gig combo device with optional AC Wi-Fi built in. Frankly, for most residential customers, unless you absolutely have terrible walls that you need multiple access points, the 4011 is going to do most of what you want. If you do have multiple access points or need multiple access points due to wall related issues or just sheer size of the residence, I can recommend combining the non-Wi-Fi version of the 4011 with these HAP AC units and their CapsMan function. Very easy. As much as I love, I've got lots of ubiquity networking gear. As much as I love the Unify stuff, once you scale past 2 or 3 access points, it becomes a pain in the ass to manage, especially if you do anything with VLANs or you have multiple tenants that you need to contend with. These, I press the button, I plug it in, and it'll see this, it'll put itself in cap mode. The CapsMan manager will see a new cap, and if it's configured to automatically adopt it, grab it and configure it with whatever your default config is. And the VLAN options are much more centralized and robust. I'm not restarting these things every time I make changes like I am with the Unify gear. So, like I said, this one's just a switch, and it's not a particularly cheap gigabit switch. You can get a gigabit switch for $15 or so. These are closer to like 40, but I love that it's PoE powered. So, all right. That said, I think that covers our networking stuff. I'll put links to some of the teardowns. I know this is an RB260GS box. I don't have the HAP AC box, but they happen to be the same size, so I'm just using the other box. This is a older Access Plus and a Byte 3. They're now on the Access 4 and Byte 4. I have a Byte 4. We reviewed the Byte 4. We've talked about it a ton, and it's currently running a public Minecraft server that is open and available for end users to connect to, and there'll be a link to that video series in the description, which has the link to the server. Quite frankly, if you or someone you are purchasing gifts for is after something that they either need a basic PC or they want something, to live in the living room under the TV and run retro stuff, either old Windows games, old Linux, older games on Linux, or emulation for things like the N64, the PS1, that type of stuff. The Byte 4 and the Access 4 are excellent options for that. Functionally, they offer similar features. On the CPU side, the Byte 4 is going to be more upgradable. The Access devices don't have any way to add additional storage outside of a micro SD card slot. They're also typically limited to just a couple of USB ports. I think, off the top of my head, that the Access 4 removed a USB port but moved to Type-C, and you can therefore run it off a Type-C dock that provides power to get a little more functionality out of it. The Byte 4 has a fairly healthy selection of ports. I want to say it's got 4 Type 3s and a micro SD card slot, but also has, unlike the Byte 3, socketed RAM and the ability to install a PCIe 2x2 NVMe as well as a SATA drive. And that's not to say that you can't use a 3x4 or a 4x4 SATA NVMe SSD in the Byte 4. It's just going to run at PCIe Gen 2 speeds. So these I can definitely recommend. The next step up in the scale is going to be something like these Lenovo mini PCs. And quite frankly, these are full-blown PCs. Typically socketed CPUs that take laptop-style RAM. They usually are the 35 or the 45-watt CPUs. You can get all the bells and whistles in these. However, they cost a lot more. These, you can get most of the configurations between $200 and $300. I think there is now an i5 version of the Byte 4. They've called the Byte 4 Elite off the top of my head. That might be a little bit more. But these you can generally get 10 Pro plus whatever RAM and storage that you want under $300. This, you're not going to get a new one for less than like $500 in a configuration you actually want. And you can pay closer to $700 to $1,000 once you start tacking on some of the features and some of the storage options from Lenovo. And same thing for Dell or HP. Although on the used market, you can definitely get these. This particular one you can see has got this additional metal bracket because it's got the VESA mount attached to it. Azul has a VESA mount bracket for the Byte 3 and Byte 4. They quite frankly don't need a VESA mount for the access line devices because they just kind of plug into an HDMI port and stay there. Although they do ship them with, and I don't have one of theirs, but I have one in general. They ship with a little HDMI extension like this one, so you could plug it into a hard to reach port and then just, I've used Velcro, I've used hot glue, I've used all sorts of stuff to hold these things in place. Last but not least, I want to talk about audio, specifically headphones, and then I've got, well, one microphone I'm going to highlight. So let's start with the easy ones, and that is going to be these clear Enduro 100s are the best Bluetooth headphones that I have ever used. They sound great. The battery lasts so long that Windows and Android are yelling at me that the battery is going to die when it still has like 20 hours of battery life, because that's just where the configured battery indicator is, at like 20%. So I've only actually managed to run these down that far like once or twice, and I basically used them every day for like 2 weeks, almost all day, before getting yelled at. So these last damn near forever. The only negative things that I can say about the Enduro 100s are that the microphone is just a pinhole style mic. There's no boom mic. If there was a model of this with a boom style mic that had some decent noise rejection, I would have bought a whole set of these for work. Because at 100 plus hours of battery life and the ability to use them while they're charging, if you absolutely ran them out, I've got 2 different call centers I support. That would be a winner right away. The fact that they sound amazing would just be a bonus on top of that, because quite frankly, no phone sounds good. So that's the Enduro 100s. These are an easy win for anything and everything Bluetooth headphone. Quite frankly, I don't have a set of Bluetooth earbuds I like. The Enduro 100s, though, they're a win. These SimGot in-ear monitors live in my briefcase. These are the earbuds I use when I have to edit video on my laptop. As great as the Enduro 100s are, Bluetooth latency is still just barely enough to irritate me when I'm editing video. If I am just watching something or on a Zoom call, not an issue. I use the Enduros. I open up Shotcut and I go to edit video. I use these SimGots. I don't necessarily like them as much as any of these, but from the lives in my briefcase convenience, these are an easy one. These are in-ear monitors. There's a similar set of in-ear monitors that was a bit cheaper than these that wasn't quite as fine-tuned, I guess I'll say, that I'll also link. Those were from RevoNext. But these SimGots are what I use to edit video on the go. This is the harder place. So we've got some Shure SRH 440s, we've got some Sony MDR 7506s, and the Clear Next audiophile headphones. Quite frankly, the Clear Next has the best construction out of the three, save for one thing. I mean, these both use plenty of plastic. You can see these things are both 10 plus years old. They've lived at a video production company. They've had better days. This one is shedding the foam covering and needs new ear pads, but otherwise is fine. Sony will sell them to you. The Shure and the Next both have detachable cables, although this is a single cable, whereas the Next uses a single dual cable. Come on, plug it in. There we go. As I say, I did this off camera and it wasn't an issue. But the one thing I really don't like about the Next is actually this plug. And there are two things that I don't like about this plug on what is like a $600, $700 set of headphones. Number one, not that it really matters, but it's not gold-plated. Big whoop, it's not gold-plated. If this was $200, I'd say, At $600, come on, guys. The other thing is you'll notice both the Shure and the Sony Professionals have this threaded interface for their their 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch adapters, whereas there is no threading like that on the Next headphones. For me, that's the bigger miss here, because as an audiophile headphone, I can see this basically living its whole life with a big 1/4 inch adapter plugged into it, attached to a hi-fi of some sort. These are all excellent headphones. I have listened to all these, and I have a hard time finishing the review on this, because some of the money that is spent on these audiophile grade headphones really goes into presentation, making them look nice, making them feel nice. These have very, very nice, thick ear pads. These were both built to do work. One of these was what I was told is the headphones that a video production company hands to their video guy. The other is what I was told is what their audio guy uses to edit their audio. So those are both working headphones, and functionally there are times when I can say that one of these is better than the other. But these are both really good and really, really hard to tell apart. There's a couple of things that stand out. These definitely have some more bass to them. They've got a bigger driver than either of these does. And the iron-free driver definitely has a different sound profile than these. And these are what I've been using to edit our videos. But it comes down to, this is a luxury product. audiophile headphones in general are a luxury product. And these are far from the most expensive headphones anyone's ever going to sell you. And if you know, or if you are that particular person or that particular segment, these are really nice headphones. But if you're on a budget and you want something yourself, either professionally or just to buy someone who you know, your fledgling YouTuber or streamer, these are really good still. And these are like $150 compared to $700. And I'm having a hard time finishing the video review on these, finding a way to demonstrate that to you, because number one, it's all very subjective, and number two, no microphone is going to pick up the difference between these. So please let me know how you want me to show you that in video form. The next item that I want to mention, and I actually only have the remains of mine, is the last item on our list, is the NW700 microphones. You can see mine says Min Life because I gutted my NW700 to transplant the electronics into a BM3000. But if you have someone that is that fledgling YouTuber that I mentioned, or an aspiring streamer, quite frankly, the NW700 is the best entry point for condenser microphones. You can get some of the kits as cheap as like $30. And when I say kits, I mean like a kit with a microphone and an arm and a shock mount and a phantom power injector and a pop filter or windscreen. And you can get all that for, anywhere from $30 to like $70, depending on which pieces you do and don't need. And some of them include some decent headphones as well. And quite frankly, you start with that. And then go on from that point. And, you can say, well, the NW700 sounds fine, but I want a better interface. And you can get something like Creative's K3 Plus, or I've got a Behringer Euphoria on my desk, or you can get a Go XLR, or one of the Elgato XLR interfaces. Take your pick there. You can move in whatever direction that you move after you've done your videos or you've done your streaming and you have some subscribers, and maybe you're making a little bit of money that you want to invest back in the channel, but you're not making thousands of dollars. You're making $10 here and $5 next month, and enough that you can justify buying a little bit better equipment but not breaking the bank. And then you can move forward to better microphones, or maybe a second microphone, or get yourself a better webcam or whatever it is. But the point of the matter is, for 9 out of 10 people, that NW700 is going to sound perfectly fine. We used one early on. We used the electronics out of it in the BM300 or 3000 frame for our weekly news roundups, where I would hope that people aren't watching for the audio quality, but just for the information presented, and because I wanted something that looked interesting. But the point, and I'll link to my original NW700 review, where I basically came to that conclusion, was that, this is great. This is the equivalent of the $100 and some odd Yeti that I also had, but that was USB and hard to sync up with the video. And that although I have moved past the NW700 myself, I've got some Audio-Technica Pro 44s in the corners of my studio here. I still have no qualms recommending it. All right, I've got one last item I want to talk about, and unfortunately, I've got no good way to get it into the studio. Maybe I'll get some footage of it running on my phone. I should say two last items. I want to talk about larger, or I should say production tools, machine tools, that type of thing. Specifically, I want to talk about a CNC laser and I want to talk about a 3D printer. So actually, around this time last year, we purchased a CNC laser for work, and it ended up not quite doing what the CEO wanted, so we sent it back. But that wasn't the laser's fault. That was just the nature of how laser equipment works. We were cutting out various pieces of cardstock, and the edges come out slightly singed because you're burning through it with a laser. And that wasn't the finish he wanted, so we ended up going with die cutting, and he stuck to the template that he generated, so we haven't had to buy new dies, and that was originally why we went with the laser, was that he was going to change the templates, and laser, you just program a new cut path. But anyway, so that was a Otur laser. Quite frankly, although it came as a DIY kit, I actually recorded the whole assembly process but never published it because I ended up sending the laser back. Frankly, it was easy to use, and I didn't really have any issues with it, and I think it ran like $300 to $400 depending on what diode and exact size you got. But that was a great laser, and I wish I had bought it from work instead of letting work send it back. But if you have someone who's interested in that type of CNC equipment or any of that type of thing, engraving and cutting, the Otur laser was a great first step. And I'm going to say first step because it was just like a 6-watt diode laser, which meant that you could cut and engrave thin plywood and acrylic and paper and coated metal, and you could do acid resist on glass, but you weren't going to, cut directly through any form of metal. Even the 25-watt pulsed CO2 laser that I originally learned how to do laser work on wasn't going to cut directly through any type of metal. So there's that, and if you get the diode laser and you learn some stuff and play around with it, and maybe from there you decide you do need a 40-watt water-cooled laser that costs $2,000. But the next item I want to talk about is a 3D printer, and this I will get some footage of running. Unfortunately, the printer is a bit too big to bring into the studio. These are just some things I've printed this particular week. A little SD card holder, spring-loaded compliant mechanism pliers that just looked interesting to have. Speaking of springs, this is an actual spring maker. You run your bit of wire through it and you spin it around and you make a spring. This is just a little CPU showcase holder for not this particular chip, but I've got an E5 2690 that I'm going to put in it, but it's a 2670 I decided to test it with. So I've got a longer LK1, which came like 90% assembled. I basically had to stand up and bolt on the Z-axis, and quite frankly, that thing's been fantastic. Other than I did learn, I cut my boat in too short once and clogged the hell out of the print head. That's not really the printer's fault. That was a user error. So I'll have a link to the LK1, and frankly, the LK1 and the Otur, if you're interested in that kind of CNC work, are great entry-level products. I'm not going to say that the LK1 is the world's best 3D printer, but at the price that it is, it's an excellent start. So I take that back. I'm actually going to link to an LK5 Pro, which appears to be an upgraded version that has superseded the LK1. And it has a similar, they're saying 11.8 by 11.8 by 15.7 build volume. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The LK5 is the model that's on Amazon right now for under $300. The LK1, I think you can still get it from Longer directly. But looking at the changes, the LK5 looks like it's going to give you better prints. I wish I had done that a little differently. That strained too much. But anyway, you can have a lot of fun with the 3D printer. Like I said, this is an SD card holder. That's a CPU stand. Little spring maker. I've got some 3D printed bits I actually use here in the studio for holding certain bits of gear. And overall, they're just a handy thing to have. They do not replace buying things, unfortunately. And I ran into that early on. I don't want to disillusion people, but I will say that there is certain stuff that I thought, oh, yeah, I'll just 3D print it, and then started adding up, and then had a failed print, or realized, well, it's going to take me 3 days to print that, or I can order on Amazon for like $5. So that's neither here nor there. Obviously, I could have bought pliers. I just wanted to play around with these. But some of this stuff, I'm not going to get a little steel spring winder without some fancier machining. And yeah, I can buy SD card holders, but I liked this little box. Anyway, I've gotten off track. They're fun to have. They're definitely a good learning tool. I'm going to hopefully use mine to teach my child some 3D modeling stuff. I find the incentive of actually being able to hold what you made the model of definitely helps some people. And anyway, I just want to close out and say I hope someone finds this guy useful. I apologize for the sheer length that it is. This has been much more time in the studio than I planned, and hopefully I managed to shorten and trim some of this up compared to how it recorded. If not, or even if I do, I want to thank everyone for watching. I would like to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables, either by using our Amazon affiliate links or by supporting us on Patreon. It's support like that helps make videos like this possible. I want to thank Alextrix for providing our opening and closing themes. Once again, finally, thank you for watching.